The neon sign buzzed faintly above the entrance of Maggie's diner, casting a soft red glow onto the nearly empty parking lot. It was past midnight, the kind of hour when most people were either asleep in warm beds or still out casing trouble. Inside, the hum of the old refrigerator and the occasional clink of dishes in the back were the only sounds that dared to compete with the country song playing low on the jukebox. Emma Carter, 23, wiped down the counter for the 5th time that night, not because it needed it, but because staying busy meant she didn't have to think too much. Her life lately had been a string of long nights and heavier mornings. Rent was due in a week. The old book she drove was threatening to give up on her completely. And the tips. Well, on nights like this, tips didn't even cover her gas. But Emma wasn't a complainer. Her mom had raised her to fight through the hard days with a smile, even when the smile hurt. So she tucked a strand of chestnut hair behind her ear, tightened her apron, and turned her gaze to the lone trucker sitting at the corner booth. He'd been nursing a cup of coffee for nearly an hour, his shoulders slouched as though carrying the weight of the highway. "You good for a refill, hon?" Emma asked, keeping her voice warm. The man lifted his mug and gave her a tired nod. "Bless you, sweetheart. Keep it coming. Got another 200 miles before I stop." She poured the steaming coffee, inhaling the familiar smell that had been her companion since she started this job. The trucker smiled faintly, and for a moment, Emma felt that tiny flicker of connection she always found comforting, proof that kindness mattered, even in small doses. The bell above the door jingled suddenly, snapping her out of thought. She looked up, and her chest tightened. 3 men swaggered in, their laughter loud and jagged against the quiet of the diner. They weren't regulars. Emma would have remembered them. The first was tall, broad-shouldered, with a buzz cut that made his angular face look sharper. The second was shorter but thick-set, tattoos crawling up his neck like vines. The third, a wiry guy with restless eyes, scanned the diner with the quick twitch of a predator sizing up its cage. Emma's gut told her this wasn't going to be an easy hour. "Evening, gentlemen," she said politely, forcing her lips into the same smile she'd given the trucker. "Booth or counter?" "Booth." The tall one answered, his tone carrying that smug authority that assumed people would fall in line. They slid into a booth near the back, voices already cutting through the diner. Emma grabbed 3 menace, walked over, and set them down. "What can I get you started with?" "Coffee, please, we've got." The wary one cut her off with a smirk. "How about you sit down right here with us, sweetheart? Forget the pies." Emma's stomach tightened, but she kept her tone even. "I'm on shift, sir. But I can get you drinks while you look over the menu." The short one leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "What's your name?" "Emma." "Emma," he repeated, dragging the syllables slowly, as if savoring them. "That's a pretty name. Bet it suits you real nice when you're not wearing that apron." The tall one chuckled low. "Don't scare her off yet. Let's order first." Emma scribbled their choices down quickly, 3 burgers, fries and beers. She didn't serve alcohol this late, but she figured lying about the cooler being out was safer than refusing outright. "Sorry, just sodas or coffee tonight." The wary one's grin dropped. "What kind of dump don't serve beer?" "House rules," Emma said, steadying her voice. They exchanged looks, and for a moment she thought one of them might argue. But the tall one waved it off. "Fine. Cokes, and hurry it up, Emma." She walked back to the counter, her heart thudding harder than she wanted to admit. The trucker caught her eye, his expression cautious, but he said nothing. Most people didn't when situations like this started to brew. No one wanted trouble. Emma poured their sodas and slid them onto a tray. Her hands trembled slightly, so she took a breath before walking them over. The wary one grinned as she set the glasses down, his eyes never leaving her face. "You married, Emma?" he asked. "No. Got a boyfriend." Emma shook her head. "Then lucky us." The short one muttered, leaning in close enough that she caught the stale tang of his cologne mixed with cigarette smoke. She straightened quickly. "Your food'll be out soon." As she walked away, she heard them laugh, a sharp, ugly sound that clung to her like smoke. She hated this part of the job. She hated the way some men thought a diner uniform was an invitation, as though working late shifts made her fair game. She'd learned to handle stares, learned to brush off comments. But there was something in their eyes that told her this was different. From the corner of her vision, she saw the trucker shift uncomfortably in his booth. Still, he didn't step in. Nobody ever did. Emma busied herself in the kitchen, flipping the burgers, listening to the sizzle that drowned out their laughter. But even with the door swinging shut behind her, she felt their presence like a shadow pressing against her skin. She thought of her mom, who always told her, "You're stronger than you think, Em. Don't let the world harden you." But strength was hard to summon when you felt small. The bell above the door jingled again. Emma glanced up from the grill through the serving window. The sound of heavy boots on tile followed, steady, unhurried, deliberate. Then came another set, and another. 5 men entered the diner, one after another, leather jackets creaking as they moved. The trucker's head lifted instantly, recognition flashing across his face. The thugs in the back booth went quiet. Emma froze with the spatula in her hand, watching through the tiny window as the men filled the diner with their presence. Bikers. The leader, a tall man with silver threaded through his beard, surveyed the room with calm eyes that didn't miss a thing. The patch on his back read Iron Vulture's MC. His crew fanned out, choosing booths and counters like they owned the place. Not with arrogance, but with the quiet confidence of men who had seen too much to be easily impressed. And for the first time that night Emma felt something shift. The thugs weren't laughing anymore. The atmosphere in Maggie's diner shifted like someone had cracked a window in a suffocating room. What had felt oppressive and hostile only moments before now buzzed with a strange tension. The thugs in the back booth, who had been so loud and cocky, grew noticeably quieter, their postures stiffening as the heavy boots of the bikers echoed across the checkered floor. Emma watched from behind the counter, her breath caught in her throat. The 5 bikers didn't say much at first. They didn't need to. Their very presence filled the room like a storm cloud rolling over a hot desert. The leader, the one with silver in his beard, glanced briefly at the thugs before meeting Emma's eyes across the room. His gaze wasn't threatening. Just steady, as if he was silently asking, "You good?" She quickly looked down, suddenly aware that her hands were still gripping the spatula too tightly. She tried to shake it off, flipping the burgers and plating fries as though nothing unusual was happening. But her ears stayed sharp, listening. The trucker in the corner sat straighter now, almost relieved. He gave a subtle nod to one of the bikers who passed his booth, like they were familiar with each other, or at least familiar with the type. The thugs, however, didn't share that comfort. Damn bikers. The wary one muttered under his breath, loud enough for his friends but not loud enough for anyone else. Think they own the place. The tall one leaned back in the booth, trying to look relaxed though his jaw was tight. Ignore We were here first. Emma set their plates onto a tray and carried them over. She could feel their tension, the way their eyes darted between her and the bikers as if they were trying to calculate their next move. 3 burgers, fries, she said softly, setting each plate down carefully. The short thug grinned, but it lacked the earlier bravado. Thanks, Emma. Didn't forget about us, huh? The Emma forced a polite smile though her stomach was tight. Enjoy your meal. As she turned to leave, the wary one reached out and brushed her wrist with 2 fingers. It wasn't a grab, but it was enough to make her jolt back. Don't be shy, sweetheart, he murmured. You look real pretty when you're nervous. Emma's face flushed hot. She pulled her hand back, her eyes darting instinctively toward the bikers at the counter. The leader's gaze was locked on the booth now, his expression unreadable, but the weight of it made the wiry thug quickly pick up his burger as if nothing had happened. Emma walked briskly back to the counter, her pulse hammering. She busied herself with coffee cups, pretending not to notice the bikers watching. The air in the diner was heavy with an unspoken question: what happens next? The bikers ordered casually. Pancakes, eggs, more coffee than Emma thought anyone could drink. Their voices were low, their laughter easy but edged with something sharp, like men who had seen enough to know when trouble was brewing. The silver, bearded leader, whose name Emma would later learn was Hank, spoke in that calm, deep voice that carried without trying. Mom, whenever you get the chance, extra syrup on mine, please. It was simple, polite, respectful, such a stark contrast to the booth of thugs that Emma almost stumbled over her response. Yes, sir, of course. When she returned with the syrup, Hank gave her a small nod of thanks, his eyes steady, not prying, not invasive, just steady, and somehow that made her feel safer than she'd felt all night. The thugs, meanwhile, tried to act unaffected, chewing noisily and making small talk that fell flat. But Emma noticed their glances toward the bikers, the way their hands twitched around their silverware. Predators didn't like when a bigger predator walked into the room. Halfway through their meal, the wary thug leaned back and called out, "Hey Emma, don't forget dessert. Bet you got something sweet back there, huh?" The laughter that followed was forced, thinner than before. Emma's cheeks burned, but she kept her back straight. "We have apple pie, pecan and cherry," she replied evenly, pretending the innuendo rolled right past her. The wary one smirked. "Cherry? Yeah, I figured." The tall one chuckled, though his eyes flicked nervously toward the bikers, who had gone silent at the comment. Emma's throat tightened. She wanted to disappear, wanted the floor to open up and swallow her whole. But before she could respond, Hank set his fork down with a quiet clink. The sound was small, but it cut through the diner like a thunderclap. Hank didn't raise his voice. He didn't even turn his head fully toward the thugs. He just spoke in that steady tone, every syllable measured. "Show some respect." The room froze. The wary thug blinked, caught off guard. "What'd you say?" Hank finally looked at him fully, his gaze calm but unyielding. "I said show some respect." The words weren't loud, but they carried more weight than a shout ever could. The other bikers set down their forks too, almost in unison, their body language relaxed yet unmistakably alert. The thugs stiffened. The tall one forced a laugh, trying to play it off. "Hey, man, we're just joking around. Don't get all serious." But his voice cracked slightly, betraying the edge beneath. Emma stood frozen behind the counter, her hands clutching the coffee pot. Her heart raced as she realized the dynamic in the room had shifted again. What had been a one-sided torment now teetered on the edge of confrontation. The trucker in the corner leaned back slowly, eyes wide, clearly debating whether he should stay or find an excuse to leave before things escalated. Hank didn't smile. He didn't look away. She's working, serving you food, show respect. Or leave. The wiry thug's smirk faltered, replaced by something harder. His pride bristled, but his eyes flicked nervously at the 4 other bikers, each watching him without blinking. The short one nudged him under the table, muttering, "Let it go, man." Emma exhaled quietly, relief washing over her as the wary one finally leaned back and picked up his burger again. But the air didn't soften, it only grew heavier, like a storm waiting to break. Hank calmly picked up his fork and resumed eating as though nothing had happened. The message had been delivered, and he didn't need to say another word. Emma realized then that power didn't always shout. Sometimes it was quiet. Sometimes it was just the certainty of someone who refused to let cruelty slide. For the rest of the meal, the thugs kept their comments to themselves, though Emma could feel their eyes burning holes in her whenever she passed their booth. Their pride had been wounded, and wounded pride was dangerous. When the bikers finished, Hank slid a 20 across the counter for his meal, then placed another 20 beside it. "For you," he said simply. Emma blinked, her throat tightening. "Thank you, sir." Hank gave her a small nod. Then he turned to his crew. "Mount up." The 5 men stood, their chairs scraping back in unison. As they walked toward the door, the thugs went unnervingly still, like prey animals holding their breath as the predators passed. The bell jingled as the bikers left, the sound fading into the night. For a moment the diner was silent except for the low hum of the refrigerator. Then the wiry thug leaned forward, his smile returning, sharper now. "Wes, it's just us again, sweetheart." And Emma realized, the night was far from over. The quiet after the bikers left didn't feel like peace. It felt like the eye of a storm. Emma stood behind the counter, pretending to wipe down coffee cups, though her hands trembled slightly. The trucker had pulled his cap lower over his eyes, sipping his coffee like a man who wanted no part in what was coming. The diner felt smaller, the walls closing in as the thugs leaned back in their booth, their smirks returning, sharper and more deliberate now that the bikers were gone. The wary one was the first to break the silence. Well, that was cute, wasn't it? Your little bodyguards strutting in here like they own the place." He leaned forward, elbows on the table, eyes glinting like knives. "But they ain't here anymore, sweetheart." Emma forced herself to stand straighter. "You should finish your food, it's getting cold." The tall thug chuckled low. "Cold's fine, we like a little fight in our meal." The short one grinned wide, showing a gold tooth that caught the neon light. "She's feisty, I like that." Emma carried a plate to the sink, her breath shallow. Don't react. Don't give them the satisfaction. That's what she told herself. But every nerve in her body screamed to run, to get out, to lock herself in the back room and call the cops. She thought of it, her cell phone was in her apron pocket. But calling the cops meant waiting, and waiting meant giving these men time. The wary thug stood suddenly, stretching his arms like a cat. He walked toward the counter, slow and deliberate, his boots clicking on the checkered floor. Emma stiffened as he leaned on the counter, far too close. "So, Emma," he said softly, his grin never fading, "you always work nights alone like this? Dangerous for a pretty girl." Anybody could just walk in. Emma's voice caught, but she managed to say, "I'm not alone. There are cameras." He glanced around at the corners of the diner, then laughed. "Cameras don't stop a thing, sweetheart. They just make good movies later." The short thug cackled at the booth. The tall one smirked, his eyes never leaving her. Emma's throat tightened. She thought of her mother again. "Don't let the world harden you, Em." But strength was hard when fear sat like a weight on your chest. The wary one reached out and tapped the edge of her apron, right near her hip. "So, no boyfriend to protect you, huh? No husband waiting at home?" Emma stepped back, her voice sharper now. "That's enough." The tall one whistled low. "Ooh, she's got a little fire." The short thug slid out of the booth, joining his friend at the counter. "Don't get upset, Emma. We're just being friendly." His grin widened. "Besides, you should be flattered. Not every girl gets this much attention." Emma's pulse raced. She glanced toward the trucker, silently begging him with her eyes, but he looked down into his coffee, hands wrapped tight around the mug. He was scared too. And Emma couldn't blame him. 3 against 1 wasn't odds anyone wanted. The wary thug leaned closer, his breath sore. "How about you sit down with us, huh? Just for a minute. Keep us company?" Emma swallowed hard. "That's not happening. Eat your food or leave." For a heartbeat, the air went still. The wary thug's grin faltered into something darker, sharper. He didn't like being told no. The short one laughed nervously, trying to smooth the tension. "Simon, man. Don't scare her off." But even he didn't look like he meant it. The tall thug finally stood, walking slowly toward the counter. He was bigger up close, his shadow stretching across Emma like a warning. "She's got some mouth on her," he said, his voice low. "Maybe she needs to learn some manners." Emma's hand slid instinctively toward her apron pocket where her phone was. Her thumb brushed the edge of it, the only lifeline she had. But before she could pull it out, the wary thug noticed. His hand shot out quick as a snake, grabbing her wrist. "What's this? Callin' someone?" Emma yanked back, her heart leaping into her throat. "Let go." The wary thug smirked, twisting her wrist just enough to make her wince. "Relax, sweetheart. We're just talking." The short one's laughter filled the diner again, bouncing off the tiled walls. The tall one leaned in close, his voice low enough for only her to hear. "Nobody's coming to save you, Emma." Her chest tightened, panic clawing at her ribs. She could feel the fear rising, drowning her. The kind of fear that makes the world blur around the edges. And then, the bell above the door jingled. Emma's head snapped toward the sound, her breath catching. The wary thug's grip loosened instinctively as all three turned to look. The door swung open wide, and the night poured in. Boots hit the tile floor in heavy rhythm. The scent of leather and gasoline carried with the cold air. The bikers had come back. Emma's knees nearly buckled with relief. Hank entered first, his silver beard catching the neon glow. His eyes swept the room once, taking in everything: the thugs, Emma's frightened face, the trucker frozen in his booth. His expression darkened. Behind him, 4 more bikers followed, their presence filling the diner like thunder rolling in. The wiry thug stepped back quickly, masking his fear with a sneer. "Oh, great, the circus is back." Hank didn't say a word at first. He just walked to the counter, slow and steady, his boots loud in the silence. He stopped right beside Emma, placing himself between her and the thugs. "You all right?" he asked her, his voice low, steady. Emma's throat was too tight to speak. She nodded quickly, her eyes stinging. Hank's gaze shifted to the wary thug, then to his 2 friends. He didn't raise his voice, didn't need to. "I thought I made myself clear earlier." The wary one tried to laugh it off, but his voice cracked. "Hey man, we were just talking. She's fine." But no one believed that, not Hank, not Emma, not even the trucker, who now watched with wide eyes, his mug forgotten on the table. Hank's men fanned out, casual but deliberate, surrounding the booth and the counter like wolves closing in. Their faces weren't angry, they were calm, steady, like men who had been here before. The short thug muttered under his breath, "This ain't worth it." But the wary one wasn't ready to back down. Pride burned hotter than sense. He straightened, trying to puff his chest. "You don't own this place. You can't tell us what to do." Hank's eyes narrowed slightly. "No. But I can make sure you don't hurt her." The diner went silent. The tension was a wire pulled so tight it was ready to snap. Emma's pulse pounded in her ears. For the first time that night, she felt the weight lift off her shoulders. Not because the danger was gone, but because she wasn't facing it alone anymore. The thugs glanced at one another, uncertainty flickering. 3 against 5 weren't odds they liked. But pride was a dangerous thing, and the wary one wasn't letting go without a fight. And Emma realized, the night was about to explode. The diner had gone deathly still. The only sound was the hum of the old refrigerator and the faint buzz of the neon sign outside. Emma stood frozen behind the counter, her wrist still tingling where the wary thug had grabbed her moments earlier. Hank stood in front of her now, broad shoulders squared, a wall between her and danger. His crew spread out casually but deliberately, each biker settling into a place that cut off the thug's exits without making it look forced. It was practiced, controlled. The 3 thugs weren't laughing anymore. The tall one shifted uneasily, trying to mask his nerves by cracking his knuckles. The short one muttered curses under his breath, his gold tooth flashing each time he sneered. The wary one, though, his pride was a wounded animal. His eyes darted from Hank to Emma, then to the other bikers. He wanted to act tough, but the numbers weren't in his favor. The trucker in the corner booth hadn't moved. He stared at his coffee like it held the answer to survival, too afraid to get involved. His silence weighed heavy, and Emma felt a stab of bitterness. Nobody ever steps in until it's too late. Hank's voice broke the quiet, low but commanding. "I don't like repeating myself. Show respect, or get out." The wiry thug forced a smirk. "And what if we don't? You gonna make us?" One of Hank's men, a younger biker with a scar running down his cheek, let out a dry laugh. "Man, you must be dumber than you look." The wary one's jaw clenched. "We didn't do nothing." A Hank tilted his head slightly, eyes narrowing. "You grabbed her." His tone was flat, like a judge delivering a sentence. "That's something." Emma's chest tightened. She hadn't expected him to notice. She hadn't expected anyone to notice. The wiry thug looked around, searching for backup. His friends avoided his eyes. The short one muttered, "Let's just eat and go." But pride had its claws in him. "Nah." The wary one snapped. "I ain't taking orders from some leather-wearing grandpa and his little fan club." The younger biker stepped forward, but Hank raised a hand, stopping him without looking back. His calm never cracked. He leaned one arm on the counter, eyes locked on the wiry thug. "Son, if you walk out that door right now, you keep your pride and you keep your teeth. But if you don't..." He let the sentence hang. No threats, no shouting, just certainty. The tall thug shifted again, his shoulders sagging. "He's right, man. This ain't worth it." The wary one's mouth twisted, torn between pride and fear. His eyes flicked to Emma again, sharp and mean. She ain't worth it, you mean? And Emma flinched. The words stung not because she believed them, but because she'd heard variations of them her whole life. Waitresses are replaceable. Girls like you don't matter. You're just background noise. But Hank didn't flinch. He stepped closer, his presence swallowing the wary thug's bravado. His voice dropped to a growl that seemed to shake the air. Watch your mouth. The wiry thug tried to hold his stare, but his confidence was leaking fast. He muttered a curse under his breath and sat down hard in the booth, jabbing at his burger like it had wronged him. For a moment, the tension loosened, though it still hung in the air like smoke. Emma's hands shook as she poured coffee for the bikers, grateful for the distraction. Her chest ached with relief and exhaustion all at once. But the relief didn't last. The bell above the door jingled again. Emma's head snapped up, her heart skipping. Another man entered alone, wearing a hooded jacket, his face shadowed. He looked around the diner, eyes flicking from the bikers to the thugs to Emma. Something in his posture screamed trouble. The wiry thug's face lit up. Well, well. Look who decided to join the party. The newcomer walked straight to their booth, clapping the wary one on the shoulder. Heard you boys were out having fun without me. Emma's stomach dropped. Reinforcements. The balance shifted again. 5 bikers, 4 thugs. The numbers weren't so uneven anymore. The newcomer glanced at Hank, then at Emma. He smirked. What's going on here? The wary one leaned back, smug now that he had backup. Nothing. Just teaching this waitress some manners. These clowns decided to play heroes. The newcomer's smirk deepened. Heroes, huh? He turned to Hank, his tone mocking. You boys some kind of knights in shining leather. The bikers didn't react. They didn't need to. Silence was their weapon. Emma's throat tightened. She glanced around the diner, desperate. The trucker still hadn't moved. A couple in the corner, who had come in quietly while things escalated, were frozen wide-eyed, whispering to each other but making no move to intervene. Silent witnesses. That's all anyone ever was. Watching but never stepping in. Hank finally spoke, his voice steady. You're late. Your friends were just about to leave. The newcomer laughed, sharp and ugly. We ain't going anywhere. He stepped closer to the counter, so close Emma caught the metallic tang of alcohol on his breath. He leaned in, his voice low but venomous. You know what I think? I think you boys don't belong here. And I think maybe she likes the attention more than she lets on. Emma's stomach lurched. That's not true. Her voice cracked, but she forced the words out. I don't. The newcomer sneered. Then say please. Please stop bothering me. And Emma's chest constricted. Her eyes darted to Hank. His expression hadn't changed, but something dangerous flickered in his gaze. The newcomer leaned closer, his hand brushing against the counter near hers. Go on, sweetheart. Beg a little. Before Emma could recoil, Hank's hand shot out, gripping the man's wrist like iron. The diner went silent, the sound of flesh meeting flesh echoing like a gunshot. Hank's voice was low, controlled, but colder than Emma had ever heard. Touch her again, and you'll regret it. The newcomer tried to yank his hand back, but Hank didn't budge. His knuckles turned white with the force of his grip. The other bikers stood now, their chairs scraping against the floor. The thugs shifted uneasily, glancing at one another. The wiry one muttered, "We got numbers now." But even he didn't sound sure. The couple in the corner whispered frantically, the woman clutching her phone but too afraid to dial. The trucker finally stood, his hands trembling, but he didn't move closer. He just muttered, "Lord help us." Emma's breath came fast and shallow. She could feel the storm breaking. The diner was a powder keg and Hank had just lit the fuse. Hank's grip on the newcomer's wrist was like steel. The man twisted, tried to pull back, but Hank didn't move an inch. His calm was terrifying. There was no strain in his face, no anger in his voice, just an unshakable certainty. "You're done," Hank said softly. The newcomer's sneer faltered. He opened his mouth to retort, but the low scrape of boots on the tile interrupted him. The rest of Hank's crew had stood up now, their chairs pushed back, bodies tense but controlled. They weren't reaching for weapons. They didn't need to. Their sheer presence screamed a warning. The wiry thug sprang to his feet, his pride boiling over. "Hey, you can't come in here and start grabbing people. Who the hell do you think you are?" Emma flinched at the sharpness of his voice. Her whole body felt like a live wire. She clutched the edge of the counter, her fingernails biting into the wood. Her heart was hammering so fast she could barely breathe. "Stop it," she blurted suddenly, her voice cracking. All eyes turned to her. Her chest rose and fell in shallow breaths. "Just stop, please." The word please tasted like defeat. She hated it, but her fear had nowhere else to go. The wary thug's lips curled into a smile, cruel and satisfied. "Hear that, boys? She's begging now." Emma's face burned hot, tears welling at the corners of her eyes. She hated herself for showing weakness, hated that they'd gotten exactly what they wanted. Her mother's voice echoed in her head, "Don't let the world harden you." But right now, she felt like stone cracking under a hammer. Hank's voice cut through, cold and even. "She ain't begging. She's exhausted from dealin' with trash like you." The wiry thug's smug expression faltered. "What'd you just call me?" Hank released the newcomer's wrist at last, but his eyes never left the wary one. Trash. And I don't like seeing trash scattered around a decent place like this. Emma pressed a hand to her mouth. Her body shook, not just from fear, but from the sheer weight of being seen. For the first time all night, someone had spoken the words she couldn't. Someone had defended her out loud. The tall thug rose slowly, his bulk towering over the booth. Why ain't taking this? You don't know who you're messin' with. One of Hank's men, broad-shouldered, bald, with arms covered in ink, stepped forward, his voice gravelly. Neither do you. The short thug shifted nervously. "Seaman man, we don't need to. Sit down," Hank ordered, his voice sharp as a blade. The command wasn't meant for his crew, it was meant for the thugs. The diner went still again. The couple in the corner shrank back into their booth, the woman clutching her phone so tight her knuckles whitened. The trucker finally spoke, his voice trembling but firm. "Maybe y'all oughta just leave." She didn't deserve this. Emma's eyes shot to him, startled. He hadn't said a word all night, but now finally he found the courage. It was small, late, but it mattered. The wiry thug turned on him, snarling, "Mind your damn business. Her safety is my business," Hank said before the trucker could answer. The wary one laughed, but it was brittle. He was cornered, and he knew it. "Man, you act like you're some hero. You don't scare me." Hank stepped forward until he was inches from him. His voice dropped so low Emma almost didn't hear it. "I don't need to scare you, I just need you gone." The wiry thug's bravado cracked. He glanced at the tall one, at the newcomer, at his short friend. None of them looked eager to escalate. The bikers weren't bluffing, their calm, steady presence radiated a danger the thugs couldn't match. But pride wasn't letting go. The wary one leaned sideways, eyes cutting to Emma. "This ain't over. You'll see us again, sweetheart." Emma's breath hitched. Her body froze, her stomach twisting into knots. The thought of seeing him again, of enduring this nightmare twice, was too much. Something inside her broke. "No," she said, her voice trembling at first. Then louder. "No, you won't." The diner went silent. Even the hum of the refrigerator seemed to fade. Emma's fists clenched at her sides, tears hot on her cheeks. "I'm done being scared of people like you. You think you can walk in here, treat me like I don't matter, like I'm nothing. Not anymore, you don't get to do that. Not here. Not to me." The words came out in a rush, raw and jagged, but they were hers. For the first time all night she wasn't hiding, she wasn't swallowing the fear. She was throwing it back at them. The wary thug blinked, taken aback. His mouth opened but no words came out. The tall one shifted uncomfortably. The short one looked away. Even the newcomer's smirk faltered. Hank's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. A spark of respect. Emma's chest heaved, her body shaking, but she stood tall. For the first time all night, she felt her own strength beneath the fear. The wiry thug sneered, trying to recover. "Big words from a little waitress." Hank's voice came in like thunder. "Big enough to end this. Get out." The thugs hesitated. The air hung heavy with the possibility of violence, but the tide had turned. Emma wasn't their victim anymore. The bikers weren't backing down, and the silent witnesses in the diner were watching with something new in their eyes. Disgust for the thugs, not indifference. Finally, the tall one muttered, "Let's go." The wiry one spun on him. "What? Wait. I said let's go." The tall one snapped, his voice sharp, final. He grabbed the short one by the arm, hauling him toward the door. The newcomer followed reluctantly, throwing one last glare over his shoulder. The wary one lingered, his pride crumbling in the face of the stares, the silence, the unspoken truth that he'd lost. He muttered something under his breath and stormed out after the others, the bell above the door jingling violently in their wake. And then, silence. Emma sagged against the counter, her whole body trembling. The tears she'd been holding back spilled over, hot and unstoppable. Her knees buckled, and for a terrifying second she thought she might collapse. A steady hand caught her. Hank's. He didn't say anything, didn't make a scene. He just steadied her, solid as a wall. "You're safe now," he said quietly. Emma let out a shaky breath, her chest heaving. The weight of the night pressed down on her all at once, but so did something else, relief. And underneath the relief, something stronger, resolve. For the first time in her life, Emma felt like she'd taken her voice back. The jingling of the diner's bell still echoed faintly, even though the thugs had been gone for several minutes. It was as though the building itself needed time to shake off their presence, to breathe again after being suffocated by menace. Emma stood behind the counter, her knuckles white against the polished chrome edge. Her breathing was uneven, shaky, her chest rising and falling as if she'd just finished a sprint. Every part of her wanted to collapse into the stool behind her, bury her face in her hands, and cry until there was nothing left inside. But she didn't, because when she lifted her head she saw them, the bikers, spread across the room like sentinels. Hank stood nearest to her, his presence steady, his hand still resting lightly on the counter. Not invading her space, not smothering, just there, a silent anchor. Behind him, the others had returned to their seats, sliding back into their booths with a calmness that almost felt surreal. They didn't gloat, didn't laugh, didn't puff up their chests. They acted as though what had just happened was nothing more than a shift in the weather. Like a storm cloud passing, Emma's lips trembled. The silence weighed heavy, almost unbearable. Finally, she whispered, "Thank you." Her voice was so soft, she wasn't even sure they heard. Hank looked at her, his expression unreadable. Then he nodded once. Nobody should have to go through that. The simple truth in his words broke something in her all over again. A tear slipped free, and she swiped it away angrily. "I'm sorry," she muttered, embarrassed by her own weakness. "Don't apologize." Hank's tone was firm, almost sharp. Then it softened. "You stood up. That took guts." Emma shook her head, the heat rising in her cheeks. "I didn't feel brave, I felt a small, like no matter what I said, it wouldn't matter." Hank leaned in slightly, his voice low but steady. "Small people don't make grown men back down. You did." She blinked at him, her throat tight. From the booth, one of the bikers, a broad, barrel-chested man with a booming laugh that hadn't yet been used, spoke up. "Damn right she did." His voice was rough, but there was warmth in it, a kind of pride that didn't belong to him, but he carried anyway. The trucker, who had sat frozen through most of the ordeal, finally found his voice again. "Miss you were something else. I should've." He cut himself off, shame flickering across his face. "I should have spoken up sooner." Emma turned to him, her shoulders softening. "It's okay, I get it." And she did. She wasn't angry at him or at the couple still sitting silently in the corner. Fear had a way of swallowing people whole. She knew that better than anyone. But still she wasn't the same as she'd been an hour ago. She straightened up, inhaled deeply, and grabbed a rag to wipe down the counter. The movement was automatic, familiar, but her hands still trembled. She tried to mask it by focusing on the shine of the chrome. "You don't have to keep working," Hank said quietly. Emma gave a short, humorless laugh. "That's the thing about diners. People don't stop wanting coffee just because your life's falling apart." She looked at him, searching his face. "You guys hungry?" The question hung in the air like a fragile offering. Hank's lips curved, just slightly, into something that might have been the ghost of a smile. "Starving." The tension broke. It wasn't a laugh, not exactly, but the ripple of relief was real. The bikers began ordering burgers, fries, black coffee, stacks of pancakes like kids who didn't care about the hour. Their voices filled the empty space that had been carved out by fear. Emma scribbled down their orders, her hands steadier now. As she moved through the motions, she felt a strange calm settle over her. The storm had passed, but in its wake was something unexpected: solidarity. The couple in the corner finally stood, approaching the counter with hesitant steps. The woman, her eyes glossy with guilt, slipped a 20 onto the surface. "For you," she whispered. I'm sorry I didn't do anything." Emma looked at the bill, then at the woman. For a moment she wanted to push it back, to say she didn't need pity. But then she saw the woman's trembling hands, the sincerity in her face. This wasn't pity, it was regret, maybe even a promise. "Thank you," Emma said softly, and this time she meant it. The bell above the door jingled again, and for a split second, Emma's heart stopped, terror spiking back through her veins. But it wasn't the thugs, it was another group of bikers. 3 of them, jackets worn and patched, boots dusty from the road. They looked around, saw Hank and his crew, and grinned. Well damn. Didn't know this was the spot tonight. The diner, which had moments ago been heavy with tension, suddenly felt alive. The new arrivals slid into booths, clapping Hank's men on the shoulders, trading low jokes and stories. The air shifted again, not back to normal, but to something better, something safer. Emma moved between tables, refilling mugs, balancing plates. She listened to the deep, rolling laughter of the bikers, the quiet murmur of the trucker finishing his meal, the grateful "thank you" from the couple as they slipped out into the night. Every sound was different now, less fragile, stronger, and for the first time in a long time, Emma didn't feel alone in the diner. She didn't know who these men really were, or where they'd come from. She didn't know if she'd ever see them again. But tonight, when she'd been at her breaking point, they'd walked in, and that changed everything. The clock above the grill ticked past midnight, its steady rhythm blending with the hum of the diner's neon sign. Outside, the highway stretched into darkness, the occasional set of headlights flashing by like fireflies. But inside, the atmosphere had changed entirely. The thugs were gone. The air was no longer suffocating, though the echoes of their laughter and threats still lingered in Emma's chest. Yet every time she glanced toward the booths filled with bikers, that weight lessened. Their low voices carried across the room, grounding the space in something. The bell above the diner door shrieked like an alarm when it swung open, slamming against the wall with a metallic clang. Emma's hand froze around a coffee pot mid-pour. The laughter at the biker's booth dulled into silence. The thugs were back. The wary one strutted in first, his grin sharp, his eyes scanning the room until they landed on Emma. He tipped an imaginary hat, mockery dripping from the gesture. Behind him, the tall brute ducked through the doorway, fists clenched like boulders, followed by the short man and the newcomer. Their swagger was exaggerated, fueled by wounded pride. Emma's stomach sank. Her chest tightened until she could hardly breathe. For a moment she thought she'd been wrong earlier. Thought maybe the nightmare wasn't over. But then she remembered Hank's words. You stood up. That took guts. She set the pot back on the counter with shaking hands and forced herself to stand tall. The wary thug's voice slithered across the room. Couldn't let it go, could ya? Had to make us look weak in front of everybody. Thought we'd just disappear into the night. Hank rose from his seat slowly, unhurried, like he had all the time in the world. His crew followed, chairs scraping against the tile in unison. The sound was enough to rattle the air. You should've, Hank said simply. The tall one's laugh boomed, though it carried more nerves than mirth. There's 4 of us. You think you can handle that? One of Hank's men, the bald, ink giant, cracked his knuckles. There's 8 of us. You sure you can handle that? The tension snapped taut. The diner, moments ago warm with chatter, was once again a stage for a showdown. The trucker sat frozen in his booth, gripping his fork like it was a weapon. The new group of bikers who had arrived earlier leaned back in their seats, watchful but ready. The wary thug sneered, but his eyes darted nervously to the growing wall of leather and steel muscle in front of him. You don't get it. We run this strip. Nobody tells us what to do. Hank took one deliberate step forward. Not tonight, you don't. The tall thug lunged first, shoving Hank with all his weight. Hank barely budged. Before the tall man could pull back, Hank's fist connected with his chest. Not a wild punch, but a precise, controlled strike that sent him stumbling into a booth. Plates shattered, silverware clattered to the floor. Chaos erupted. The newcomer charged at the bald biker, swinging wildly. The biker caught his fist midair, twisted his arm and slammed him onto the table. The short thug jumped onto a chair, trying to kick another biker, but he was grabbed mid-leap and tossed down like a rag doll. Emma's heart pounded as she ducked behind the counter, peeking over the edge. The sound of fists, shouts, and breaking furniture filled the room. The wary thug darted toward her, eyes blazing with fury. Time slowed. For a split second, Emma froze, terrified. But then something inside her shifted. She snatched the heavy steel coffee pot from the counter and hurled it. The pot struck him square in the chest. Hot coffee splattered across his shirt. He howled in shock, stumbling backward right into Hank's grip. Hank pinned him against the counter, his voice low and furious. You don't touch her ever. The wary thug's bravado crumbled. His eyes flicked wildly around the room. His men sprawled, groaning, pinned. The bikers stood tall, a wall of unshakable force. The diner itself seemed to hum with the weight of the moment. Emma stood straighter now, her chest heaving. She wasn't hiding, she wasn't silent. She was part of this fight, even if all she'd done was throw coffee. Hank leaned closer to the wary thug, his words sharp as broken glass. You walk out that door, and you don't come back. Not tonight, not ever. If you do, you won't walk out again. The wary thug swallowed hard, his eyes darting to Emma, looking for a flicker of fear he could cling to. But all he saw was her glare, steady and unflinching. And that broke him. Fine. He spat, though his voice cracked. Hank shoved him toward the door. One by one the thugs scrambled out, nursing bruises and egos, muttering empty threats that nobody in the diner believed. The bell clattered weakly as the door slammed shut behind them, and then, silence again. The bikers stood still for a moment, their breath heavy but controlled. Then, slowly they returned to their seats. The trucker exhaled loudly, setting down his fork with trembling hands. Emma stood behind the counter, her chest still rising and falling rapidly. Her knees threatened to buckle, but she stayed on her feet. Hank turned to her. You all right? She let out a shaky laugh, wiping sweat from her brow. I just threw coffee at someone. Does that count as all right? For the first time that night, Hank smiled. Genuine, small, but real. Counts as brave. The room rippled with low chuckles from the bikers. Emma felt her cheeks flush, but this time it wasn't from shame. It was from something she hadn't felt in a long time: pride. The diner was a mess, broken plates, overturned chairs, spilled drinks. But for Emma, it had never felt safer.